Are 2 million tenants about to get a rent freeze, or did the Rent Guidelines Board offer landlords a little wiggle room? The Point starts right now. Kenny Burgos is the head of the New York Apartment Association, a group representing landlords of buildings with rent-stabilized apartments. So I guess you'll understand we're going to talk about the sort of guidance decision by the Rent Guidelines Board, which holds out the possibility that there could be a rent freeze.
I'd be shocked if we didn't.
You'd be shocked?
If we didn't.
But they're holding, is there any wiggle room for landlords to not have a zero rent freeze?
Well, right now they put the preliminary range out, which is 0 to 2% for a 1 year and 0 to 4 for a 2 year. But just this fact that they would put a 0 in the range is shocking in and of itself, because nothing in their data would even warrant a 0%. Neither would it warrant a rent freeze, but it does seem the politics is presiding more than the data.
But in fact, the mayor said that as a condition of getting elected, that he would impose a rent freeze. So he appointed people to the board who seem leaning towards a rent freeze. You know, you could understand where tenants could be excited about the fact that they're not going to have to pay any more to live in their apartments. Why is that a good idea or a bad idea?
Totally understand why a tenant would want that. I wouldn't argue that, nor would I argue the affordability crisis is very, very real. But putting a blanket rent freeze on a regulated housing stock that has a median rent of $1,500 and is facing double-digit increase in costs on insurance, on property taxes, on water, sewer, labor, this is how you can, and fuel is how you can squeeze the operations and you get these substandard housing conditions. Now, it doesn't mean we don't address affordability. Tenants should be protected and should be helped. Mayor Mamdani is pushing back on the City FEP's voucher expansion. We should be expanding that. That's how you prevent homelessness.
They can't afford City FEPs.
But this is where the government has to help with affordability.
There's no way to afford
But they're
City
pushing
FEPs.
an affordability on the owners who can't afford it as well. This is why owners are going to defer maintenance, go away without repairs. Mayor Mamdani just spent time in this building this week, in a building that had substandard conditions because it's rent stabilized and it's been bankrupted twice.
Look, so we have a situation where you would argue that there are big landlords and small landlords. And I guess you would argue that bigger landlords have more of an ability to absorb a rent freeze. But what about all the small property owners, the people who own smaller buildings, people who live in minority neighborhoods who, you know, maybe rent out 2 rooms?
I actually wouldn't argue that exactly, because if you're a larger building, you have costs that go parabolic, a host of regulations that come in based on the size of your property. But it's to speak to the entire rent stabilization industry. They're all struggling, small and large landlords.
But the reason I asked the question is because there are some who have advanced an argument to the Rent Guidelines Board that you should separate out the buildings, especially small property owners who own buildings that have like 10 apartments.
That was my argument, and it wasn't for small and big. It was because in the rent stabilization system, there are 2 categories that I separate. Pre-1974, which is the majority of the stock, over 800,000 units. And then you have the newer developments, the ones that people see on the affordable housing website, people who voluntarily enter the rent stabilization system and receive a property tax break for it and have $4,000 or $5,000 rents. Completely different world. The people I represent, the pre-1974, pay the highest property taxes, have some of the lowest rents, and have to pay all the costs of operating housing. They're the ones being squeezed.
But so you, I'm sure, have gone to the Rent Guidelines Board with statistics to show that your owners are being squeezed and are not making a profit. What are you telling them?
Absolutely. I'm telling them their own data. The Rent Guidelines Board's own data says 10% of the housing stock is in financial distress. That's 100,000 apartments. For comparison, NYCHA has 177,000 apartments. Also, the Rent Guidelines Board's definition of financial distress is literally your rent is below your expenses. I would argue you're in financial distress well before you reach that point. So it's likely 200,000 or 300,000 apartments. And what I'm saying is a rent freeze against that backdrop, against this housing stock that's been struggling, only threatens to put more buildings in financial distress. And how is that pro-tenant to bankrupt a building tenants are living in? Where are their options after that?
So what you're really saying is that if you bankrupt a building, then the conditions get worse.
Absolutely. And this is why we're seeing more violations post the 2019 rent laws that absolutely destroy this housing stock. But on top of that, the Rent Guidelines Board has come in under inflation for a decade. On top of that, we've seen inflation post-COVID. So this housing stock has been struggling well before Mayor Mamdani, but his threat of a rent freeze only threatens to add more distress and to hurt more tenants in this process.
But, you know, there's a whole bunch of empty apartments. Why is that?
Because of the 2019 rent laws. The 2019 rent laws made it so that there are now tens of thousands of apartments that I visit weekly that are sitting empty in the midst of this housing crisis because it is economically unviable to bring them to market.
So we have to talk about the 2019 housing law, because what it did is it made it more difficult for people to flip apartments.
Yeah, no, that law is the reason why this housing stock is devalued, is in financial distress. And it's not a flip. What was happening, that's the way you finance these buildings. Repairs in New York City cost a lot of money. Right now, on average, about $100,000 to get an apartment up to code after a long tenancy. NYCHA spends $400,000 to do this.
$100,000
at a minimum.
For one apartment?
Lead remediation.
But why? What does the $100
Because the city
go for?
council is passing laws almost every single month that add on regulation that you have to abide by when you have turnover. Lead remediation being one of them. It's almost $25,000.
I mean, but like, you can't cost $100,000 to repaint an apartment and make sure that
It's not just repainting.
you have new employment. Well, what do you have to do?
Oh, lead remediation, asbestos, you have to put window guards, you have to sometimes remove the walls. When you're doing lead remediation alone, you're gutting it down to the studs. Tenants live in these apartments typically 20 or 30 years. You take that opportunity on turnover to bring it up to code, to bring it to a new, updated apartment that families actually want to live in.
So how can a landlord afford $100,000 to bring an apartment up to code and keep it on the market?
Today, they can't. That's why you have these empty apartments.
So why is it that people don't understand that, and that the Rent Guidelines Board has turned a deaf ear to your pleas?
Well, the Rent Guidelines Board can't solve that. That's a state law. People don't understand it because it's one of the most complex housing systems in the country, and I don't blame them. This is why I make social media videos, and I'm constantly on media appearances trying to explain how complex this housing is. But at its core, this housing is regulated by the city and the state. It has a median rent of $1,500, and per the Rent Guidelines Board, costs $1,350 per month just to operate. We're not even talking about the cost to invest and renovate the capital improvements. So all that put together, you don't have enough of a rent roll. You can't borrow from a bank. This housing is going to fall apart.
So I have to point out one thing.
Of course.
During the Bill de Blasio years, there was a rent freeze in 2015, another one in 2016, and another one in 2020 during COVID. The city didn't fall apart, and there's still apartments. So if they could do it during de Blasio, why is it so bad to do it during Mayor Mamdani?
Complete different scenarios. Like I said, the law changed in 2019. This was the law that changed everything. So a rent freeze in the de Blasio era and a rent freeze today after everything that I just said are two completely different worlds. This housing stock wasn't in this financial scenario in those years in the de Blasio era. Today, the rent got, because the law changed.
You're trying to say it just got worse?
It got tremendously worse, Marcia. We're seeing an increase in violations. The Rent Guidelines Board is showing our reductions in repair and maintenance. We have thousands of units sitting offline. I can show you buildings in the Bronx selling right now for $19,000 per apartment. And that's not an advertisement. That is a warning sign. This housing stock is almost mirroring what we saw in the 70s. There's almost no value in a rent-stabilized building today because there's no path to cover the expenses that are continuing to increase. If you cannot cover your costs, you cannot function. It is as simple as that. And the city keeps increasing the cost, but is capping on the revenue and then wants to freeze on the rent. The law, there's nowhere to release the pressure anymore.
But if you have a situation where you have a building that says, listen, here's the reality. My insurance costs have gone up X%. My fuel costs have gone up X%. Why doesn't the Rent Guidelines Board look at those statistics?
That's my question that I have, Marcia. They look at all these numbers, they get all its reporting, and they actually produce what's called a commensurate adjustment, which is a percentage base to say this is the number we have to adjust rents to account for all the increase in costs. They do that math. The math this year was 4.5% on a one-year lease. So they do the math, and then they completely ignore it because the politics is what is the pressure that's put on them. So they've done this math already, but now they're putting a 0% increase to 2% on a 1 year. So their range is half of what they say that's needed just to keep these buildings treading water. This is not about an increase in profit. This is just to try and sustain the increased cost. So you have the same question that I have. You have the data, they have the math. Why not follow the math? Why not make this a math equation?
So we have about 15 seconds left. What would you say to them? 15 seconds.
Follow the data. I don't need 15 seconds. Follow the data. The data says it all.
But the thing is, they don't look at it.
They do, and they produce reports. We look at them, we analyze them. They have all these reports. They just are not following them.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it right there for now. But up next, a woman who is using her marketing skills to help stop the spread of anti-Semitism. Archie Gottesman is the co-founder of JewBelong, a nonpartisan nonprofit group that seeks to stop the spread of anti-Semitism. So, Archie, just this past week, the ADL issued a report which basically said that New York leads the nation in anti-Semitic incidents, although there was a slight decline from the year before. There was an increase in assaults, making the attacks on Jews more personal than ever before. So tell me, why is this going on?
This is going on because there was an organized, very long, terrible infiltration of foreign beliefs against Jews, against Israel, that has been simmering for years. And
when you say infiltration, who are they infiltrating?
They started by infiltrating the colleges, and then they decided to infiltrate the far progressive America. They really believe that and it's foreign money. It's whether it's Qatar or Iran, there are people who really are happier when Americans are fighting with each other. And that just, they've been, and anyway, and we took the bait, and Americans are more fearful.
But see, here's the thing. It seems that the anti-Semitic incidents are much more pervasive than they've ever been before, and they're much more personal in that it's not just swastikas or anti-Semitic phrases like, you know, that are posted on storefronts. It's personal attacks. So why has it changed from the theoretical, we're just going to put a, not just, but we're going to put a swastika, to personal attacks about people who appear to be Jewish?
Because there has not been enough strong fighting back and saying this is outrageous. This would not be, it would not be okay if it were any other group. But for some reason, when the attacks are against Jews or sometimes allies, there just seems to be an acceptance of it that it would not be the case with other marginalized communities.
So why are people accepting it now? I mean, if you take a look at the NYPD, there was a 60% of all the hate crimes in the last year were against Jews. That means that 40% were every other group, be it transgender or gays or blacks or Hispanics or any of the other Asians. I mean, every other hate group combined had 40%, the Jews had 60%.
Why? So why is it being accepted now?
Why is that?
Because, frankly, it's become popular. I mean, we have a mayor who was talking about globalizing the Intifada. That's an uprising to murder Jewish people. And he was elected mayor. That's just a specific thing in New York City, but it's happening all over the country. There is very little price to pay when people are violent or say violent things about the Jewish community. So if there's no price to pay, plus it can gain popularity in some circles, then it keeps going. And that is why it needs to be stopped, and we need more allies.
Why is there not enough public condemnation?
Because there seems to be a price to pay when people condemn it. JewBelong works with different allies. We mostly work with Christian groups, churches, and ministries, and who literally, when you stand with Jews, you may very well get criticized, and you have to be bigger than the haters to do that.
So have you had success in getting people to your side?
We have success every day. We have billboards that have been in 46 states. And I'll tell you a good story. And this happens all the time. Hundreds and thousands of people see our billboards. And just the other day, someone reached out. This was in Atlanta. And he said, my daughter was sitting in the backseat of the car. She saw one of your billboards. You don't have to be a Jew to protect Jews. She texted her cousin, who happens to be Jewish. This guy wasn't, his daughter wasn't. And she texted her cousin and she said, are you okay? And the cousin texted back, yeah, I'm on my way to dance class. Why? And she said, because I saw this billboard about Jewish people. And this person, this guy who shared the story, said, you know, that started an important conversation with my daughter and with me, and thank you for sharing. Most people in America don't hate Jews, okay? Like, Jews are 2% of the entire country. There's hardly any. I mean, I'm Jewish. There's hardly any of us. But for some reason, we have such an outsized hate against us.
Right.
And that's been the case. We've seen this movie. We know what happens because we know what happened in the 1930s in Europe. And we need to, we cannot hope it goes away by just not talking about it.
So you come from a marketing background. You're using your marketing background to try to overcome Jew hate. So is it just the billboards, or what else are you doing?
It's mostly the billboards because the billboards are very, very important awareness. That's how we got to this. It's people don't want to know, many people don't want to know the entire history of the Middle East or, you know, they want to know, though, when we put up a billboard, we have done studies before and after, and people who are, excuse me, we don't have any Jewish people in the studies, or we don't have people who care that much at all about the issue. And they say that combating anti-Semitism is an urgent issue, increases by 28% after they see the billboards. And then when further research, they say, I didn't know. I didn't know it was so bad. And it is so bad. And we need to be getting people, just like every other social justice issue. Just like when there was Chinese hate, there were amazing, not that there's not anymore, but it was a big deal. There were campaigns. There were campaigns for Black Lives Matter. The Jews need to be loud and proud and work with allies. I actually have, because, you know what, Marcia, I'm just going to give you one or many of these bracelets. It says, I need to be able to tell my children I did not stay silent, because someday our children, our grandchildren are going to look at us and they're going to say, what were you doing in 2026 when people were being attacked because they were Jewish or they were standing with Jewish people? And I want to have a good answer. I think anyone with a real heart will have a real answer, and that means standing up.
Okay, Archie, thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it right there for now, but our conversations continue right after the show on our streaming channel, CBS News New York. Thank you for joining me. I kind of like the idea of a robot vacuuming my rugs, especially since I have a cat that sheds. But a robot performing an appendectomy or teaching a class? Nah. How do New Yorkers feel? Well, they're weighing in on your point. What could a robot be good for?
Personally, I think nothing.
Walking a dog?
Cleaning the streets?
Husbands?
Husbands.
No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
Absolutely not.
I love that answer. I love that answer.
I don't know. They're taking over the world.
Nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Why?
I mean, let's see. Automation knocked out how many jobs in this country? So we're just going to have, like, Tesla trucks hitting people all over the city, you know? Leave it to the taxi drivers and to drive. I don't need any robots. I don't need any of those delivery bots. That's just a nuisance.
Would a robot make a good teacher?
No.
Probably not.
Yeah, I think so. It depends on who built it.
As long as it's checked that they're providing the correct information.
They're not human.
You need a human quality.
You have to have feeling and instinct.
They have no empathy. They have no emotion.
Would robots make good teachers?
Absolutely not. I teach. They should be nowhere near the classroom. AI, robots shouldn't be anywhere in our schools.
So what, if anything, would you want a robot to do for you?
Help me with my business.
If it could cook me dinner, clean the house.
Wash the dishes. Clean the house. Take orders from me. Be my little slave.
Probably clean the damn house and wash the dishes and stuff like that. But I do the cooking.
Cook.
What would you have them cook?
Everything. Everything Spanish.
I don't know that I would have a robot do anything for me. I think I would just live my life as humanly possible.
There's nothing I want a robot to do for me that I can't do for myself.
Do you see robots as any part of your future?
Absolutely.
Yes, I do see robots as part of my own future.
Unfortunately, maybe.
No, not really.
I guess it's a new thing now. Yeah, it's the norm.
Definitely.
Why? What would they do?
Innovate the world.
It already speeds up my job a little bit.
In what way?
When I take notes for things, it helps speed up the process.
Do you see a robot as part of your future?
Yeah, unfortunately. It's scary.
But why?
I don't know. First of all, they're made of metal and all kinds of stuff. Secondly, they don't have a heart and they don't have a, well, maybe they do have a brain. I don't know.
I do not see robots as part of my future unless we're in like a Terminator situation.
Is a phone a robot? A phone technically could be a robot, right? AI, Siri. So yes, I think it's inevitable, but we should mitigate the bad and try to deal what we can.